God often chooses to speak in a whisper, not because he is silent or distant, but because he desires that our hearts lean in close to him. A whisper requires attention, humility, and a willingness to pause long enough for the noise within us to settle. In a world overflowing with opinions, demands, and distractions, the whisper of God becomes a sacred invitation to slow down and listen with the soul instead of the ears. When the world shouts for our attention, God whispers for our affection. He draws us not by force, but by a gentle voice that only those truly seeking him can discern. And in that quietness, we discover a God who is intimate, intentional, and ever-present. His whisper is not faint because he lacks power, but because he desires relationship rather than mere response. There are moments when the whisper of God feels softer than the troubles surrounding us, and yet it carries more weight than every earthly noise combined. The world shouts its instructions boldly, urging us toward busyness, fear, or ambition that disregards the soul. But God whispers a countercall, inviting us to rediscover who we are and whose we are. His whisper cuts through confusion not by volume, but by truth that resonates in the deepest part of us. When we choose to lean toward his voice, the storms that once seemed overwhelming lose their authority. What once felt urgent shrinks in the presence of divine clarity. His whisper realigns our hearts, reminding us that the one who speaks softly still reigns sovereignly. In hearing him, we relearn the rhythm of peace and the assurance of purpose. Leaning into the whisper of God requires more than ears. It requires a surrendered spirit. A heart cluttered with worry or pride will miss what God is speaking, not because he is silent, but because we are not still. The whisper of God bypasses the surface and speaks directly to the interior landscape of our being, transforming us from within. When he whispers courage, fear begins to lose its grip. When he whispers forgiveness, bitterness withers. When he whispers direction, confusion unravels. Yet none of these blessings come through haste. A whisper is only heard by those who intentionally quiet their surroundings to seek the source of the sound. God's whisper trains us to value his presence above the world's applause. It molds our character in ways loud voices never could. In listening, we become shaped by divine intention rather than cultural pressure. There is a holy tenderness in the way God whispers into the human heart, a gentleness that conveys both love and authority. His whisper does not demand but draws, not overwhelms but invites. He whispers to us in moments when the world expects us to collapse, assuring us that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. He whispers to us in seasons of waiting, reminding us that delay is not denial. He whispers when we are uncertain, revealing that he has been guiding us long before we noticed his hand. The quieter his whisper becomes, the closer he calls us to come. In answering that call, we discover that his nearness is not merely comfort, it is transformation. The whisper becomes the anchor that holds us firm when the world pulls us in 100 directions. Hearing the whisper of God is not a momentary event, but a cultivated posture of life. It requires steady surrender, daily attentiveness, and a willingness to value divine subtlety over worldly volume. As we learn to distinguish his whisper from the noise around us, we develop spiritual discernment that shapes our choices, relationships, and identity. God whispers so that we will not merely hear him, but seek him. And in that seeking, we find clarity that cannot be shaken by the opinions of others. The whisper becomes a guiding light through the fog of uncertainty. It becomes a compass when we feel lost, a balm when we feel wounded, and a promise when we feel forgotten. The more we respond to his whisper, the more aware we become that he has been speaking all along. The whisper of God often arrives without fanfare, yet it carries a weight that no earthly noise can rival. The world roars with promises, pressures, and opinions, demanding that we conform to its hurried pace and restless desires. But God speaks in a tone that quiets the storm instead of competing with it. His whisper does not fight for space among the world's clamor. It simply stands above it in authority even when delivered softly. One divine whisper can dismantle fear, redirect a life, or awaken a calling that the world never saw coming. While the world measures significance by volume, God measures it by truth. And the truth he speaks, even in a whisper, possesses a power that reshapes destinies. It is not the loudest voice that transforms us, but the truest one. The world shouts to convince us that strength must be loud, noticeable, and dramatic. Yet God proves the opposite through his gentle voice. When he whispers hope, It pierces places no shout can reach, healing wounds hidden beneath layers of silence. When he whispers identity, it steadies the soul against the world's labels and expectations. His whisper carries the authority of the one who spoke creation into existence, and the universe still stands at attention to his voice. The roar of the crowd may stir emotions for a moment, but the whisper of God anchors the spirit for a lifetime. Though the world clamors for attention with noise and spectacle, the whisper of God finds the one who is searching for meaning beyond the surface. And in that whisper, we discover strength that needs no applause to prove itself. There are times when the world's roar is so overwhelming that it seems impossible to hear anything else. Yet God's whisper cuts through with a clarity only experienced in the spirit. The louder the world becomes, the more distinct God's whisper grows for those who seek him. His voice does not tremble in the presence of chaos. Instead, chaos trembles in the presence of his voice. A single whisper of peace from God can silence the anxiety that 1,000 voices tried to feed. A single whisper of purpose can dismantle the confusion that noise has built. The world may try to drown his voice with fear, doubt, and distraction, but the whisper of God carries a supernatural power that no earthly volume can suppress. And for the heart that learns to listen, that whisper becomes the guiding echo that leads through every storm. The whisper of God is powerful not because of its softness but because of the one who speaks it. And that truth changes the way we respond to everything around us. When we begin valuing his whisper over the world's roar, our priorities shift, our courage strengthens, and our identity becomes anchored in something eternal. The world shouts to shape us from the outside, but God whispers to transform us from the inside. One whisper of reassurance from him can restore what years of noise tried to destroy. One whisper of calling can ignite a fire that no criticism or doubt can extinguish. While the roar of the world chases visibility, God's whisper seeks intimacy. And in that intimacy, we discover a power that does not need noise to prove itself. For the whisper that comes from God carries the weight of heaven behind it. When God whispers an assignment into a person's heart, it is often something the world cannot interpret, measure, or validate. His directions rarely come with public announcements or grand explanation. Instead, they come quietly, personally, and with divine precision. The world expects clarity made visible, but God gives clarity made spiritual, unfolding step by step rather than all at once. He reveals purpose in ways that bypass human reasoning, allowing faith to become the lens through which destiny is seen. What he whispers may seem too small, too strange, or too hidden for others to understand, yet it carries eternal significance. God plants callings in the soil of secrecy before he grows them into visibility. The world may overlook what God initiates in silence, but heaven does not. And every whisper from God contains more truth than the loudest voices around us. Divine assignments often challenge the expectations others have placed upon us because God's direction is tailored to who he created us to be, not who the world assumes we should become. People see only the surface, our limitations, our past, our appearance. But God sees the unseen capacities within us. When he whispers purpose, it is not based on public approval but divine design. The world wants explanations it can measure, but God gives instructions meant to be obeyed, not debated. And often those around us cannot comprehend what God is cultivating within us because they are not meant to carry that calling. The whisper of God becomes a sacred trust placed in the heart of the one who is willing to listen. It is the invisible seed that grows into visible impact when nourished by faith and obedience. Others may not understand it now, but God always knows what he is doing. When God whispers destiny, he does so with a wisdom that surpasses human counsel. And that is why the world often misinterprets what he is doing in us. What the world calls insignificant, God calls preparation. What the world sees as delay, God sees as development. His whispers often steer us toward paths that make no sense at first, roads that seem too narrow, too uncertain, or too quiet. Yet, it is in those very moments of uncertainty that faith grows the strongest. The calling God assigns is crafted for our spiritual growth as much as our outward purpose. He whispers instructions that stretch our trust, refine our character, and align our hearts with his timing. The world wants immediate results, but God wants deep roots. Those who learn to trust the whisper will one day see the harvest the world never expected. God never announces destiny to the crowd before he speaks it in secret to the individual, and that is why divine assignments are often misunderstood at first. People may question, doubt, or even discourage what they cannot discern. But God whispers, so that the voice we follow belongs to him alone, not to the opinions surrounding us. The world often resists what it cannot explain, yet God specializes in calling people to things beyond human understanding. He whispers courage when others expect us to break, hope when others believe the story is over, and direction when others see only confusion. Divine assignment requires divine listening, because no earthly voice carries the blueprint of our life. And when we follow the whisper, God equips, strengthens, and prepares us in ways the world never sees. There is a sacred mystery in the way God reveals purpose, quiet enough to require faith, personal enough to require relationship, and powerful enough to require obedience. His whispers do not need validation from the world, because they originate from the one who holds eternity. The calling may begin unseen, unnoticed, and uncelebrated, but in God's hands, the hidden becomes holy. The world may never fully understand the depth of what God speaks to a surrendered heart, but their understanding is not required. What matters is the obedience of the one who hears him. In time, the whisper becomes testimony. The unseen becomes undeniable, and the quiet assignment becomes a story of God's faithfulness written in a life fully yielded to his voice. Obedience to the whisper of God carries a strength that does not come from human willpower but from divine fire placed within the soul. What begins as a quiet instruction becomes a supernatural courage that the world cannot comprehend. When God speaks softly and we respond boldly, heaven supplies a flame that transforms weakness into resilience. His whisper becomes the spark, and our obedience becomes the tinder that allows his power to ignite fully within us. The world often expects obedience to be dramatic or impressive, yet true obedience is often hidden, steady, and humble. It is in the unseen moments of saying yes to God that spiritual fire is kindled. Each act of obedience becomes a log placed on the altar of our lives, preparing us for what God intends to set ablaze. And when that fire comes, it is a flame the world cannot extinguish. The fire born from obedience is not fueled by talent, resources, or the approval of others. It is sustained by the strength of God himself. Many people wait for visible signs before stepping forward, but God often asks us to move before the evidence appears. When we obey his whisper without knowing the full path, we invite his power to shape the journey ahead. This divine fire gives courage to stand in places where fear once dominated, to speak where silence once ruled, and to love where bitterness once lingered. The world may try to extinguish the flame with criticism, doubt, or opposition, but divine fire does not bow to earthly resistance. God strengthens every step taken in obedience, turning ordinary moments into extraordinary evidence of his presence. The more we follow his whisper, the brighter the flame becomes. Nothing confounds the world more than a person who obeys God despite circumstances that appear impossible. Obedience in adversity creates a fire that burns with purity, purpose, and unstoppable determination. When others see obstacles, the obedient heart sees opportunity, because the whisper of God reveals what human sight cannot. This fire enables us to overcome what once overwhelmed us, to persist when quitting seems reasonable, and to hope when every natural sign points toward despair. Opposition only intensifies the flame, for God uses resistance to refine rather than defeat. The world may try to explain away your endurance, strength, or victories, but they cannot explain the fire within you. That fire is the evidence of a heart that has responded to the quiet voice of God. And once God ignites such a flame, no force on earth can smother it. Obedience to God's whisper does more than light a flame within. It spreads, influencing and inspiring others in ways we may never fully see. A single obedient life becomes a living torch, illuminating paths for those lost in darkness. The fire God ignites in us is not meant to be hidden or contained. It is meant to testify of his power, his goodness, and his faithfulness. As we continue to obey, the flame becomes steadier, stronger, and more radiant. It begins to touch lives around us, shifting atmospheres, breaking chains, and awakening hope in places long cold. The world may not understand where the fire came from, but they will see its unmistakable glow. And though it started with a whisper, obedience transforms it into a fire that stands as a witness to the God who speaks, ignites, and empowers his people beyond anything the world could ever comprehend. The world may overlook you, misunderstand you, or ignore the quiet work God is doing within you, but his whisper carries a future that human eyes cannot yet perceive. What he speaks in the hidden places is not diminished because others fail to hear it. It is preserved, protected, and prepared by his own hand. God often begins his greatest works in silence, so that no human voice can claim credit for what he alone has designed. When he whispers identity, purpose, or promise, it is spoken with eternal intention, not temporary approval. People may see only your present, but God sees your unfolding story from beginning to end. The whisper you hear today may not match your circumstances, but it matches your destiny. And though the world cannot hear it now, God will reveal its truth in his perfect time. There are seasons when obedience to God's whisper feels lonely, unseen, or misunderstood. But these seasons are the training ground for divine revelation. God allows the whispers to grow roots before they bear fruit, ensuring that when the promise emerges, it cannot be shaken by circumstances or opinions. Others might question your choices, doubt your direction, or misread your silence, but their understanding is not the foundation of your calling. God is the one who declares the purpose. The world is merely the audience that sees the result. And while they may not recognize the whispered instructions shaping your step, they will one day witness the faithfulness of the God who spoke them. Every unseen step you take is building a testimony that will one day speak louder than every doubt surrounding you. The world often requires proof before believing, but God asks for faith before revealing. What he whispers to your heart may seem impossible, improbable, or entirely beyond your current capacity, yet his word carries the power to fulfill itself. He does not whisper guesses, he whispers guarantees. When he speaks promise, he also arranges provision, timing, and preparation. The world might see delay, but God sees alignment. The world might see struggle, but God sees strengthening. And while others may dismiss your quiet journey as insignificant, heaven knows the exact weight of every step you take in obedience. When the time comes for God to unveil what he whispered in private, it will be clear that his hand, not human approval, brought it to pass. God's revelation rarely comes early, but it never comes late. The whispers he speaks in the quiet moments are seeds planted with intention, and every seed requires a season of darkness before it breaks into light. You may feel hidden, but you are not forgotten. You may feel unseen, but you are being prepared. God allows the world to misinterpret you so that, when the time comes, his glory, not your reputation, will be what shines. The whisper you carry is not fragile. It is fortified by the one who spoke it. At the appointed time, what was whispered in solitude will emerge with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. The world may not hear his whisper, but they will see his fulfillment. The truth is that what God whispers today becomes the testimony the world witnesses tomorrow, and nothing can silence what God intends to reveal. Every quiet instruction, every hidden season, every unseen sacrifice is part of a divine story being written with purpose and precision. God does not waste your waiting, nor does he overlook your faithfulness. What he begins in secrecy, he completes in glory. And though the world cannot hear the whisper that guides you, they will one day see the evidence of the God who spoke it. When that day arrives, it will not be your voice that explains the journey. It will be God's faithfulness that makes the story undeniable.